me and thankfully my editor kept saying, no, 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 no. It's got to be crazier. It needs to be that when somebody sees this on a bookshelf next to a bunch of other nonfiction books, they go, what the hell is that? The idea that you come for the money and you stay for the tech. I don't think it's bad to make people curious about crypto through number go up and through speculating on shitcoins and through gambling on the presidential election on Polymarket, because that's what gets people interested. That's what gets them in the door. It was very clear that there were these massive players with billions of dollars to throw around who were still pulling the strings behind the scene, who were still manipulating the market to their benefit, and who were just purely ruthlessly profit-driven. I think it's happening. I think people are starting to realize that the university system is just ridiculous and bloated and unnecessary.
How did reading Atlas Shrugged in high school change your life?
Ooh, you've done your research. All right, we're off to a good start. Let's go. So this is a funny one because, Atlas Shrugged, obviously, it brings a whole weight of opinions with it when you mention that book. But when I was in high school, my mom had really loved it when she read it in college, and she had recommended it to me. And so I read it sophomore year of high school, and it was the first time in my life that I had read a book that argued something I really disagreed with. Going into it, I didn't find Rand's both economic and ethical arguments very compelling. But by the end of it, I felt way more convinced. And for a while, I was like the annoying Ayn Rand guy, just wanting to everybody has to read Atlas Shrugged, blah, blah, blah. Which I think is a normal phase for people to go through the first time they find a new ideology that challenges their worldview in a compelling way. And I read it and I was just like, oh my gosh, not only was this a really enjoyable book that gave me this new perspective on life, it's what made me initially interested in entrepreneurship and business and all of these things. But it was really the first time that I had read something and it had shown me that my worldview was at least partially incomplete, that there were great arguments out there that I didn't agree with, but that might be compelling if I read a good case for them. And it really started this whole journey for me of trying to explore the world of ideas and information and try to find the ways that my understanding of the world was inaccurate or could be improved on in any domain. And so, going into that or going into reading it, I wasn't totally sure what I was interested in academically, but coming out of it, I was very interested in philosophy and in business. It really created both those interests for me, and it kind of sent me down this path of reading a lot of philosophy, reading a lot of pop nonfiction, just trying to download information, and also started my interest in like building a business and being entrepreneurial and making money. And like making money isn't a bad thing. It can be one of the more noble things you can do as a way to improve and influence the world around you. So it was hugely impactful when I read it in high school. Now the funny tie off to this story is I reread it 4 or 5 years ago, and I could barely get through it. It didn't hit the same. I found that, Rand had fascinating ideas and she created a fascinating world, but she's not a very good writer. And there were just all of these things in the writing that I kept getting hung up on and annoyed by. And I felt like some parts of it were overdone. And I felt like, pieces of it had been argued better elsewhere, or I just didn't resonate with it as strongly. So it was this really great experience rereading it of, reading this started a journey, and I grew and learned a lot in the 10 odd years it had been since I read it the first time. And now it doesn't have that same impact. And that's a really important lesson with books too, is that a book that changes your life might be completely forgettable to somebody else because it has to hit you at the right time with the right ideas.
Yeah, totally. Like I read Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead a little after I'd already started to get into Austrian economics, and like I understood like profits are actually good if they're earned on the free market fairly and not like through force and stuff. So for me, like I still found it really a really good read, and like I feel like just her philosophy and the virtue of selfishness and all that, it's like that was all good stuff to grasp. Although I don't really agree on her epistemology that much because I got for Karl Popper and David Deutsch's stuff. But anyway, like I thought that was a great read. But it's cool that it like made you question some core beliefs about money and just entrepreneurs, I guess.
And I think that that's one of the magical things about that book and her work in general is that it can give voice to an idea that maybe itches at some people's minds of, that there clearly is some pro-social merit to uh virtual ethicness, or what's impersonal ethics. There's a term for it, but basically that the best thing for everyone is going to be if everyone is honestly acting in their rational long-term self-interest.
Mhm.
And it that is true and is very hard to execute because there are so many things that are trying to pull you into short-term self-interest, which is often pushing you in the exact opposite direction of your long-term self-interest. So in some ways, the more interesting question, which Rand doesn't fully explore, but and honestly, it's not often explored that much by philosophers, probably because it's too nuts and bolts, it's too practical driven, but is okay, how do we shift our motivations and actions and desires towards that long-term self-interest, and how do we fight the short-term self-interest voices that are constantly creeping into our heads?
I want to talk a bit about writing because you're obviously prolific online and now offline as well. How did the dynamics change from being a blogger to writing a book, and what were the aspects of your writing process that remained the same?
It's a really hard transition. It's extremely challenging, and I think it's easy to underestimate how challenging it is to go from writing for the online world to writing for books or something much more durable. Because I started writing online in, it was either 2012 or 2013. I'll say different years because I can't remember which one it is. I should look that up. But it was somewhere around then. And I've been publishing blog posts, often more than publishing something online, blog post, book summary, whatever, usually more than one thing a week for a decade before I started writing Crypto Confidential. And when you do that, writing online is really magical because you get this instant feedback and you never have to work on something for that long. I think the longest I've ever worked on an article is maybe 2 weeks. It's never this very, extended process. And the minute you finish it, you can start to get feedback on it, good, bad, and you can get reactions, right? And as much as you might think that that doesn't matter and you're focused on the work, it feels good to know that somebody is at least reading it, right? I mean, even if you get an angry email saying that, your piece is wrong or whatever, like that person still took the time to read what you wrote. That's kind of cool. And you elicited enough emotion from them that they felt the need to correct you, right? That's a powerful reaction to elicit in someone. So a decade of online writing, I didn't realize how dependent I had come on external validation for my work, in the sense of seeing the email list go up, seeing the Twitter followers grow, getting the likes and comments and emails. That was a pretty powerful force through that I didn't realize was there. So when I started working on Crypto Confidential, it it was really, really, really hard to shift towards working on something that somebody might not see for 2 years. I started writing it in like on June 2nd of 22, and it published July 9th of this year, 24. So it was over 2 years before anybody could read the final version. And honestly, those first few months were really, really hard. I was really down on myself. I felt very lost and very unmotivated, and it really felt like a slog. And part of it was that I was coming off the high of working in crypto, where every day you're checking prices and your net worth is going up and down, but some days it's going up and you get to make bets, and they win or they don't win. And to go from that mania to sitting alone in my dining room working on this for months and months and months was really hard. And honestly, it's like, I think I just had to go through it. I just had to keep showing up every day and keep putting words down. And it took about a year. But after a year, I started to feel like, man, I actually like this more. Like this is this is a more rewarding use of my time because there isn't this pressure to finish it right now. I can keep honing it and keep tweaking it, and I can get it to a point where I'm really, really proud of it and then get it out there instead of feeling like I constantly have to be putting something out. And what it made me realize is that there is a very clear and, in some ways, exponential relationship between the amount of time you spend making something, in this case, writing, and its long term durability. Because if you spend a couple minutes writing a tweet, even if that tweet hits a million people, it's gone in 3 days. And probably no one is ever going to surface it again. I've actually used this example before, and it's funny that I'm using it now, but in some ways, Naval's like 2 year Twitter saga, where he was just putting out banger after banger after banger, and it was incredible. In some ways, that would have been lost if Eric hadn't turned it into the almanac of Naval, because people don't go dig up old tweets very often. Like, he's maybe the exception people do, but for the most part, tweets just get lost. And so what I realized the more I worked on the book was, by spending 2 years working on a book, I could do writing that would be read in 20 years, in 50 years, right? If you make something good enough. I mean, Dune, they just made a third movie about it, and Frank Herbert's dead, right? Like, it's still living, and that's really, really powerful. And so it changed my relationship with work in this pretty fascinating way, where it made me want to spend longer working on things so that they can last longer after I've stopped or after I've deprioritized them. Because for the last decade of working online and doing articles and courses and trying to do lifestyle businesses and things, they all died really quickly. And they died quickly because I didn't spend that much time building them. So it was a tough transition to go through, but now I'm way more committed to that path. And I actually have a hard time prioritizing articles and short form media in general, because I just see it as so fleeting and in some ways worthless, which is it's a tough balance to strike, because it can be valuable for getting more eyes on what you're doing. But if you're spending 2 hours a week writing tweets, you're not getting that much ROI off of that. Whereas 2 hours a week on a book, you might have a book at the end of the year.
Interesting. Yeah. What was marketing this book like? Even just looking at the cover image, like it doesn't seem like a typical nonfiction book.
Yeah. So, the book is a narrative nonfiction. It's a story. It's my journey working in crypto during the last mania, both as a degenerate gambler and as a builder. And when the mania started dying down in 22, I had this theory, which turned out to be correct, that there would be some books written about that period, but they would pretty much all be written by outsiders. They'd be written by journalists. They would be uh, people who were observing it, people who didn't really get crypto, who didn't really get what it was like to be in the thick of it. And there wouldn't, and for every SBF or Three Arrows Capital or CZ, there were tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who made crazy money, lost crazy money. It hurt their relationships. It gave them the freedom to go do something else. There were all these like little personal stories that happened along the way that would get missed from these outside views. So I said, okay, let's try to let me try to write the insider story of working during that period. And then the challenge, though, in terms of marketing and in terms of packaging, is one, I've been a nonfiction how to self-help blogger for 10 years. And so that's kind of what people expect from me. And when I was writing about crypto during the mania, I was writing explainer articles, like, this is what's cool about what's being built on ETH, and this is DeFi, and this is how NFTs work. And so I knew people would expect a crypto 101, what is Bitcoin type book from me. But I didn't want to write that because I knew it would be outdated almost immediately. And I knew it would not reach as far as I thought a story about the period had the potential to reach, right? Like, some people might get upset, but actually, people don't get upset about this stuff anymore. I can just say it, right? Like, it's a very male dominated industry. It's like 90% guys who were doing this during the last mania. And all of the wives and girlfriends were on the other side of the room, sick and tired of hearing us talk about crypto. And so a big question in my mind was like, could I write a book about this period that would also be interesting to the wives and girlfriends, and that would help, teach a few things along the way? And so there were like all these forces that were going into making it. And then when it came to marketing it, it was this challenge of, how do we make it really clear that this is not a what is crypto book, that this is a fun story. This is like an adventure. And so all of the packaging and everything went into trying to convey that idea. And so the cover, it's got this monkey on the slot machine in this kind of messy watercolor style. The title and the subtitle are in this scrawly handwriting. The interior design has all of these fun, like confidential style pages. The chapter headers are in that scrawl. I wanted it to really look from the outside like this was a journal or this was something that somebody threw together while drunk and smoking a cigarette and just came off of some horrible experience or some euphoric experience, and I wanted to like convey all of that energy in the book and in the packaging of it. And so it was really hard because the publisher didn't want to do that at first. They were like, no, 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 we do business books, and so we're going to do the big block text, and we're going to do not too much design. It's everybody knows what a nonfiction book looks like, right? Like they wanted to do that. And me, and thankfully my editor, kept saying, no, 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 no. It's got to be crazier. It needs to be that when somebody sees this on a bookshelf next to a bunch of other nonfiction books, they go, what the hell is that? And I think we succeeded because I've seen it in a couple of bookstores now, from like going to our bookstore here and from pictures people send me, and it pops. It really pops next to normal nonfiction books. And so I think we did a good job with that. But even despite it, people still think it's a what is crypto book. And so I think a lot of it is just word of mouth and people talking about it and saying like, oh, this is actually a really fun story. You're going to have a good time reading it, and letting the word of mouth do the work as well.
Yeah, I heard you mention elsewhere that you wanted to make this book like really fun, fast paced, and almost like a beach read, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it
yeah.
really did feel that way for me. I haven't read many books that I get so emotionally attached to, and I read a lot of books, right? Also, I think the way you sneaked in the crypto knowledge was really genius. How is it trying to balance the, like making it engaging as well as making it informative and putting in the crypto knowledge?
Dude, it was so hard. This was honestly like the worst idea I could have had for a first book, because writing a page turner, writing a thrilling novel is really hard. Like that is an art form, and it's an art form that gets kind of insulted by calling the books beach reads or pop fiction or chick lit or any of the terms that we use to refer to like non-literary fiction. Because at the end of the day, writing a book that somebody finishes is one of the hardest things that you can do in writing, especially today when their phone is probably right next to them and they could just pop open TikTok or whatever. Doing that is really hard. And that was a whole journey in itself. But then to learn how to do that while also trying to explain this crazy world that we live in, and explain that there's a difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum, and to explain that there are stable coins and there are apps that you can build on the blockchain, and all of these things that I knew I had to convey, doing that without losing the energy of the book, without sending them to their phone, was a serious challenge. And that was probably what I struggled with the most, where in the beginning I thought that the hard part was going to be to make it an exciting read. And so I studied that a ton and got really, really, really deep on storytelling and writing thrillers, and ended up doing that successfully. But then everybody started saying, well, the crypto stuff is confusing, or they would get bored reading the crypto stuff. And I started giving it to, wives and girlfriends or women who had no interest in crypto at all, to see if they could get through it and if they learned something from it. And they would come back with questions like, so Ethereum is part of Bitcoin, right? And I'm just like, oh gosh, no, like it's not even close. Okay, I gotta like redo so much of this. And that was probably 70% of my editing work, was taking these crypto explanations, making them simpler, whittling them down, and then eventually pulling them out of the narrative and putting them in those in-between chapters. Because as long as the explanations were in the narrative, people would fall off. But what I ended up doing is basically every chapter ends on a cliffhanger. So something awesome or something terrible is about to happen, and it doesn't happen until the next chapter. And in between those two chapters is this little 3-page explainer of some crypto thing. And you can skip it, you can come back to it later, or you hopefully read it, and that cliffhanger is what pulls you through that tougher explanation to get you to the next part. And I think that ended up working really, really well because the crypto people often just skip them. They don't need to know, you know, what's exciting about blockchains, but the non-crypto people do read them. And I've gotten a lot of great feedback on those sections because they're like, oh, nobody's ever given me a good reason why blockchains are exciting or why they should exist. And you actually did that here, and you did it in 2 pages, which again is a really hard thing to do. And I'm really proud, honestly, of how those explanations came together because we had to work so hard on simplifying them. And eventually, where I landed, and I think this is what a lot of crypto people maybe get wrong, is you don't have to give a 100% total and accurate explanation to a newcomer. The analogy I like to use is like when you're learning physics in high school, they give you the planetary model of the atom, right? Where you've got like protons and neutrons in the center, and the electrons are like whizzing around them like planets. And that's not really true. It's not really what we know about atoms now, but it works. It works to like bootstrap your knowledge of what's going on. And then if you want to go deeper on it later, you can. And so that's kind of what I did here is just take out some of the details, simplify some things, make parts of it slightly inaccurate intentionally to help create that base understanding. And then they can fill in the details later if they're curious enough to go do so.
I see a divide in the crypto space where one side, some people are there just because they heard it's a way to make quick and easy money, and on
Yeah.
the other side, there's the Bitcoin maximalists and those who believe in the long-term philosophy and the technology of the cryptocurrencies. And I feel like you started in the former a bit,
Hmm.
and like
Totally.
kind of graduated to the latter, which also includes like the engineers like building and pushing the technology further. So I think you obviously know like both of those camps, and um, I feel like if people only read about crypto in the news, right? They look at all these scams and they just see the price action level, right? They're not looking at what's happening at the technology level. They don't really understand the like philosophical nature of it, because that's not what gets clicks and views on major
Totally.
news outlets. So I'm curious, like how do you think we can better make the case for better make the technological and philosophical case for these cryptocurrencies, and say that like explain that they're superior compared to fiat?
I generally, this term is used sometimes jokingly, but I think there's a lot of truth to it. The idea that you come for the money and you stay for the tech. I don't think it's bad to make people curious about crypto through number go up and through speculating on shit coins and through gambling on the presidential election on Polymarket, because that's what gets people interested. That's what gets them in the door. And if all they do is come in the door, buy some ETH on base, bet on the election, grab an NFT or something, and then leave it there, like that's fine. They don't have to understand what's going on under the hood. But some subset of them will get curious and will stick around and will want to learn more. And so I think it's fine, honestly, if some of the hype is around, you know, being early to these apps and getting airdrops and getting free money from nowhere just for, using a bridge or something, right? Like that's sexy. That's what hooks people. And then it's just a challenge of once they're hooked, how do you hopefully show people that there is something cool here beyond speculation? And, you know, eh, that's going to come more just as more things are built. And I've had this experience a couple of times now where I first got interested in crypto in 2017. Like I first got more interested in 2017. I'd heard about it before then. And I was betting on ICOs and stuff. And I remember having a conversation with a friend back then that after that mania died down, we were saying, we don't have to get involved right now. We can come back later and it's still going to be early. And in 2020, 2021, 2022, it felt like, oh, this is it. Like it's actually happening now. There's DeFi and there's NFTs, there's all this stuff. And like now's the time we got to get in. We got to build things. And I really got in and I went crazy on it and I learned solidity and did all of these things. And then I stepped away from crypto and I really didn't look at anything for the last 2 years while I was working on the book. And I'm diving back into it now and getting really active on Warpcast and all of this stuff. And Honestly, it's still really early. Like a lot of the apps still haven't been built yet. There's still so much opportunity to make things that I think people could totally be forgiven for coming in last cycle and saying, there's not really anything here yet. And maybe they leave a little bit of ETH in their wallet or they still have their Bitcoin. And now during this cycle that's coming, maybe this is the one where they say, oh, actually, like Warpcast is cool. Like I actually like it better than Twitter because the things you can do with frames are neat. And like taking a picture and minting it on Moshi and making a couple fractions of an ETH when somebody mints your photo, like that's cool, right? Like that's a real use case. And so I think that it doesn't need to be urgent. Like we can be patient. An analogy might be like cell phones, right? Where my mom had a really early cell phone in 1995, and there's this great photo of me as a toddler holding her cell phone, like pretending to take a work call on it. It's one of those big brick ones. And that was 95. And the cell phone didn't really become a big deal until 2010, 2012, when we had the iPhone, when there were really compelling apps to use on it. And we didn't start developing, neck issues and everything from being hunched over our phone until 10, 15 years later. And so these things take time, right? If we start thinking of when if we started the clock on people starting to regularly use crypto apps as when ETH launched mainnet, which is what, 2015, 2016, it might not be until 2030 that most people are using some kind of crypto app. And that's fine, right? Like these things take a long time to become mainstream. When you look at Bitcoin, right? It launched in 2008 and it's only now getting some mainstream adoption as a store of value. And so it's been 15, 16 years. These things take a while and we just kind of have to be patient.
You mentioned Warpcast. So what do you think about these decentralized social media like Farcaster and Nostr?
I mean, I love the premise, right? So, I've been an online creator for over a decade. I've had a popular blog. I have a relatively popular Instagram and TikTok. I have a YouTube. I have a Twitter. And on the one hand, those are incredible tools. The fact that anyone can just upload a video for free and get paid when other people watch it is insane. Same thing with Twitter, right? That you could just reach millions of people and you don't have to. I mean, imagine how you would have to do that 30 years ago, right? Like only presidents had that kind of reach. And now, you make a Hawk Tuah joke on TikTok and suddenly you got hundreds of millions of people seeing you. So, all of that's really incredible. But I think that the incentive issue is true in that the platforms are incentivized to promote whatever's the most engaging. You as a user do not get much share in the profits you're generating for the platform. But that also makes sense because that's how Web2 apps had to be built. It was the only way for them to be able to afford to do these things. And so there's definitely potential for a new wave of social based on decentralized protocols where you do own more of the upside of what you're creating, where you can introduce these kind of like novel funding mechanisms. And I think it's just kind of like the jury's out on whether or not anybody actually wants to buy a creator token, right? Like, I still don't necessarily find that insanely compelling. I mean, I could definitely imagine that, imagine if YouTube had creator tokens or something. And when you found Mr. Beast at 1 million subs, you could have bought Beast token. And now you're getting a share of all of his platform generated revenue for the foreseeable future based on how many of his tokens you own. And you can sell those in the secondary market. Like people would buy those tokens. They would totally bet on people like that. And I think we'll see something happen. But again, the pitch to normies can never be, this is decentralized, right? Like this is free of, Apple's control or Facebook's control, because nobody really cares about that. Like your mom who just wants to scroll memes on Facebook doesn't care. But if the app is actually better and it's a more entertaining experience or it's doing a better job of whatever you go on social media for, then it has a chance to win, especially if there is some like little financial benefit bolted onto it. What I think we want to avoid is what we saw last cycle and what we'll definitely see again with these apps launching purely as speculative platforms, right? Like BitClout was the big one last time. where everybody just rushed in to speculate on people's BitClout tokens. And then 2 months later, it was dead, right? And nobody was using it. Nobody was posting there because it wasn't actually any more enjoyable or better of an experience than Twitter. Twitter was a better social media platform. And so everybody just went back to that. So it's the same with gaming. The only way any crypto stuff is going to win is by building an actually better experience that happens to have these Web3 elements built into it as well.
You bring up the term exit liquidity many times in your book.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't think I really understood what that term meant before reading a book, but now I see it as a really important concept. So you had a crazy story with Cryptocraft where you suspected Three Arrows Capital was about to use all of you as exit liquidity going into a fundraiser.
Yeah.
And you had a dilemma about whether to sell your tokens before they made you and many others the exit liquidity, or but you ultimately, I think, decided not to just play that game anymore. If I remember correctly, like you even opened up the like the sell window. What made you change your mind?
Yeah, that was a really eye-opening experience because Three Arrows had invested in the game that I was working on. They were the lead investors in their seed round, and they'd committed $2.5 million to them. And leading up to the fundraising announcement, we start to see the token price going up on the public market, which there was really no reason it should have been going up like that. And it created this question of like, okay, why is the token going up before the fundraiser? Like how do people know that this is happening? And I hadn't told anyone. The team said they hadn't told anyone. And so it was really this question of like, where is this buying pressure coming from? And after some sleuthing, what we found out was that Three Arrows had been buying the tokens in the public market leading up to the fundraiser. And at first, it was kind of confusing because if they've already invested 2.5 million, why did they buy another million plus in the public market? And one, what I realized was that it was a way for them to double dip. They knew when the announcement was coming out. They knew that they could start running up the token ahead of the announcement, and they knew that other people were watching their wallets. And so other smart people could see that Three Arrows knew something. And so all this other money was following them into the token. And it was kind of an eye opener in the sense that I had felt like I had figured the game out, like I was winning, like I knew how to game these crypto launches, or I could work with teams to get tokens and make money. But it was very clear that there were these massive players with billions of dollars to throw around who were still pulling the strings behind the scene, who were still manipulating the market to their benefit, and who were just purely ruthlessly profit driven. And when you're in a market with somebody who's just a total shark, if you have any like, you know, ethical balance to that, or if you have any reservations, like you're just going to lose. And so I've been selling tokens every day, and I kept a bunch of them and sold a bunch of them, and I had a cadence. And then it was this question of, okay, I can see that Three Arrows is doing this. Do I just dump everything else that I have before they can? And it was a few $100,000, and I decided not to do it and to just let those tokens keep selling at my normal rate over the next few months, even knowing that the token was probably going to crash as soon as the fundraising announcement came out, which it did. And that kind of just made me realize, like, okay, you maybe don't want to play against these people, because if you don't have some really special insider knowledge or some real leg up on them, like you're just never going to win in the trading game against them. The only way to like win, I think, is, I mean, one, to really be so in it and to be so ruthless that you're willing to just make anyone else exit liquidity, or it's to work on something, right? It's to build something, because by building things, you have very limited downside and this almost infinite upside. Whereas if you're trading, you could lose everything that you put in, and you could lose everything that you make along the way, right? We've all interacted with people who might have been up a million plus and then like lost it on a couple of bad trades. And a lot of people who you saw winning huge amounts of money on Twitter would then double down and put it into something else and end up losing what they had made. So it kind of solidified that idea for me that I shouldn't try to play this speculative game. It's not worth it. I should just focus on trying to make things, because that's going to pay off way better in the long run.
Your book obviously feels very raw, and you share your ups and downs very authentically. Was it hard to do that, especially with a name and face attached to all of it?
It was, but I also felt like it was necessary. I think that so many people got consumed by that mania and look back on how they acted during that period with just confusion or shame or kind of like, why was I putting money into these things or why didn't I sell or all of that. And there were so many people who had that kind of story that I thought it was really important to capture those emotions because let those people know that they weren't alone, right? So many other people went through an experience like them. And for anybody who's coming in the future to let them know that there are unknown costs to playing this game and to doing well at it. Like it literally one day I'm just screwing around trying to learn how to write Solidity and making contracts for fun. And then 6 months later, people have put $100 million into these contracts and like we might be about to lose all of it. And that's kind of all on me. And it's not somewhere that I had any inkling that I would possibly get to, but it got there and I was just totally unprepared for it. And it did have all these really bad psychological consequences. So it was hard, but I also felt like it was necessary, especially if the book was going to have any longevity. Because if it was purely a how to trade crypto or how I got rich during the last mania, it's kind of forgettable. It doesn't have that same emotion with it. But if you have the wins as well as some of the pretty harrowing losses and pain as well, you really build a personal connection with the reader, I think, and they build a much more personal connection with the book, and it's much easier for them to recommend it, to enjoy it, to share it with people, and I think it gives the book a lot more power that way.
Why do you think anonymity is so common in crypto? I know it's very context dependent, but what would you say are some advantages and disadvantages to being anonymous in this hyper online world?
I mean, the fact that you can see anybody's wallet and what's in it is kind of crazy. And so if you're going to be really active in crypto and you're going to work on projects and you might end up in a situation where there's millions of dollars in your wallet, you kind of don't want that attached to your name because there could be security concerns with that. There could be you could get treated differently by people. There's just a lot of stuff that comes with that you don't want to deal with. And so pseudonyms are a great way to protect yourself from that because a pseudonym where you have a consistent anonymous persona that you do all of your work through, a pseudonym can still have a reputation. It can still be a trusted person in the space, even if there's not a real name attached to it. So you can still build rep, but by having it disassociated from your like IRL name, you create some security for yourself. So I think it's kind of a natural response to some of the risks inherent in the industry. I also honestly think part of it is just fun. We've all lived in this smiling headshot social media world for 20 years now, right? Starting with like MySpace and Friendster and some of those. And I think a lot of us are sick of it. I'm kind of sick of it. I don't want to try to maintain this like online Nat persona as well as the IRL Nat persona. And the only way I do that is by just kind of being myself online. But it's kind of fun to play a character, to take on a role and to play that character consistently. And crypto kind of gives you the freedom to do that, which can be really exciting.
Yeah, some of my, one of my favorite accounts actually is pseudonymous on X, and you sort of form a relationship with them, even though you don't really know their
Totally.
name or and face, which is really impressive. Like just like through their posting style, because the posting style is the same, right? Because that's what builds their reputation. But
Yeah.
I definitely think it's a bit harder to do that as an anonymous character, but you can still get there.
Yeah. And that was one of the crazy things when I started working with the game in the book was all the founders were pseudonymous. So I had no idea what their real names were, where they lived. I didn't know what their voices sounded like, which was a very strange type of job to take on, but kind of just par for the course in crypto and something you have to be okay with.
So in one of your YouTube videos, you talked a bit about productive constraints for writers,
Mhm.
and I think we can broadly generalize that to for artists and other creators as well. What are some constraints that you use that are helpful with writing?
Hmm. That's a great question. In some ways, I talked about how hard it was to write a thriller. And in some ways, it was made easier for me because I had the constraint of sticking to real events that happened. There wasn't an infinite bag of possible things that could have occurred during the mania that I could talk about because I had to stick to my story. And that was actually a very helpful constraint because I knew the plot points. And then it was just a question of how do I make these as exciting and interesting as possible. It's been a real challenge switching to fiction writing now because I could do anything, right? I could make anything happen. And that is in some ways limiting because you'll often feel stuck. You'll hit writer's block because you have no idea what should happen next. Whereas if you have a set timeline, you know exactly what should happen next. And so, constraining the realm within which you can be creative is really helpful. There's a great story from A Swim in the Pond in the Rain by, oh, what's the author's name? George Saunders, where he talks about helping one of his students write a scene, and she says like, I have no idea what to write about, like I just feel completely stuck. And he says, okay, uh write about the write about the building that we're in right now. And so she starts writing a little bit about the building. She's like, I still feel stuck. And he's like, okay, write about the top left brick in the building. Like, write 500 words about that brick. And that's actually easier to do than to like write 500 words about anything for someone who's not used to writing very much. And so narrowing the scope of what you're doing can be really, really helpful for actually being more creative. And there's a lot of examples of that too, right? If you ask somebody to tell a joke, they might get stuck and be like, I don't know any jokes. But then you say, tell a knock knock joke, and they actually have an easier time thinking of a joke now. And so you can use that a lot with anything creative. But I think it
Haiku
goes
is a good
for,
example, right? Like
yeah,
poetry, haiku.
exactly. Right. If you say write a poem, that's hard. You say write a haiku, and oh, okay, I can do a haiku. Right. But it works for like your work style too. So for me, I said, okay, I've got to write 2,000 words a day for this first draft. Like that's going to be my cadence, and I'm going to do that until I'm done. But if you give yourself the whole day to write 2,000 words, you'll screw around a lot. You'll go on X, you'll respond to emails, you'll clean the house, whatever. So what I did was I would go to a cafe most mornings, and I would sit down and I would say, okay, I literally cannot eat. I cannot go anywhere else. I cannot do anything besides go to the bathroom until my 2,000 words are done. And they would pretty much always get done by noon, like 9:30 to noon. I would sit and have my writing time, and the words would get done. And that was extremely helpful to me when I started doing the sci-fi novel. I got the first draft done in 2 months just by using that process. It's like, sit down, you cannot leave until you get the words done, and then you can go do whatever else. And that's a pretty powerful constraint to put on yourself.
So you've published a lot of your notes from the books you've read. I particularly like the beginning of Infinity one because that's my favorite book. I'm curious, what's your reading style, and do you like, how do you take notes? Because I used to be quite serious about taking notes, but I just lost interest over time. I felt that like taking notes really like kind of broke the flow, and so I just like try to connect the dots later in my mind. But I wonder if it's still like efficient or valuable to do that.
No, I think you came to that realization much earlier than me, and I think that's the right realization. I was definitely obsessed with reading every single nonfiction book under the sun, trying to download all the information I could, trying to take notes on it, catalog it, organize all of my notes to some, crazy web of knowledge. And then I realized I was never using it for anything worthwhile. It was just like a game. It was just fun. And so I pretty much stopped doing it. And and to be honest, it can sometimes be a crutch because some people get really into like taking notes from everything they read and cataloging all of these like anecdotes and stories and examples and whatnot. And then when you read their writing, it's really clear that they pieced that thing they're writing together from a bunch of note cards. And it just doesn't read well. It reads very stilted and awkward and impersonal. And I think it actually leads to bad writing. So I don't really think about that much at all anymore. I'll highlight something if it looks interesting, or I'll tab it if I'm reading a physical book, but I don't do much of the pulling notes out anymore. I kind of want to try to do it a little bit more because people do find value in that part of my site, and it would be nice to keep fleshing that out. But honestly, the other thing too is I just don't read much nonfiction anymore. I just read fiction. And that's been really nice because there's really no pressure to highlight when you're reading fiction. You can just enjoy it. And what I've found the biggest value in fiction, in reading fiction for writing fiction, is that you really do learn by osmosis. If you're very deliberate in the books you read, you will start to bring that style into your own writing. And and that can go in good and bad directions, right? So when I was working on Crypto Confidential, I read like John Grisham, and I reread Red Rising a couple of times, and I read these books that had this incredible pacing. Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, another one, because I wanted to like download that pacing. I wanted to like get into that mindset for my writing, and it was really really helpful for doing it. And then while I was working on my sci-fi novel, I I reread East of Eden by Steinbeck, which is incredible, like one of the most amazing books ever written. But as I was reading it, I started writing kind of in that style. It was slower, it was more flowery, it was more drawn out. And I was like, I was like, this is the totally wrong vibe for this book. This just does not fit at all. And I ended up deleting a bunch of the stuff that I wrote while I was in that headspace because it was just wrong for the book. And so you have to be pretty tactical if you're reading to influence your writing on what books you let in, depending on where you are in the process.
What do you think about the future of work? We're obviously living in some crazy times, but the traditional career mentality of starting hard, getting into a good college, then getting a job and climbing the corporate ladder, that still like prevails, sort of. And frankly, I think a lot of potential just goes to waste because that narrative is pushed onto children in schools and by their parents.
Yeah.
Um, Now that I think of it, your book might actually be a good read for a lot of parents whose kids are into crypto and they don't really understand it. It's like a mysterious world, and you just like the kid just gives them the book, and like they see these
Yeah.
ups and downs and they try to grasp it. So yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting uh, book for them.
I I am hopeful that we are going to move back in the direction of the relationship we used to have with universities. So East of Eden is a great example here because in the last section of the book, Adam's kids are grown and they're deciding what to do as they turn 18. And one of them decides to go into business, and one of them decides to join the army. And those were just a couple of the options that you had. Actually, one goes to university and then he joins the army. And it wasn't that everybody goes to university. It was, okay, you're about to be an adult. And so you pick one of these next paths. And one of those paths would be the clergy. You know, you'd go join the church. I think that a lot of people who are influencers today would have been clergy people in a past life because that was how you like scratched that itch if that was the itch you had. Or you join the army, or you become an apprentice in somebody's business. Or if you want to do something where a university setting is necessary, like physics or true computer science, not programming, like then you go to a university because that is what it is excellent at, is teaching and getting you up to speed on the edges, on the frontier of human knowledge so that you can then contribute to it. But if you want to do a job, which is what most people do and most people should do, you don't need to go to university to do that. You can learn basically any valuable skill online or through apprenticeships. There's no reason you should have to spend 200 grand to go do those things. And, you know, people like us are on the frontier of this idea. It's going to take another decade or two before it becomes more or commonplace. But I think it's happening. I think people are starting to realize that the university system is just ridiculous and bloated and unnecessary. And, you know, if one of my daughters is 18 or something and she's really passionate about writing, I'm not going to tell her to go get an undergraduate writing degree because it's like kind of worthless, right? Like it might be fun to go do that, but it's not going to make you a good writer. What's going to make you a good writer is like writing. And at the end of 4 years, she could have published 4, 6, 8 books, depending on how focused she is, versus like having a worthless piece of paper. So I think that we're hopefully going to see a shift back in that direction, especially as the tools for self education get better and better. I mean, I've been trying to teach myself things online for over a decade now, and it's so easy to learn now. Oh my God. Like trying to learn marketing 10 years ago when there really wasn't like YouTube, there weren't influencers who you could follow on Twitter or TikTok or whatever to learn from. There weren't all these incredible courses and resources. There were like books. Like I figured it out And so the idea that somebody who's in high school right now can't figure out how to get basically any job through chat GPT and YouTube and, reaching out to people is ridiculous, right? You can just go do it.
Exactly.
I, Motivation is certainly a problem, right? A lot of people don't have the motivation to do those things, but they could still apply for a 6-month boot camp to get up to speed in a skill, pay a fraction of a college degree, and then be pretty employable by the end of it. And that's a much better system than the current university one.
What inspired you to build Prolific?
Mm. Yeah, I'm glad you asked. I mean, honestly, it was so painful reorienting myself from writing tweets and articles to working on the book that I just had a Google spreadsheet where I said, like, this is how many words I wrote today. And this is how long it took. And, I'd write little notes to myself. And it became this really cool journal over the course of the 2 years where I could see every single writing session, every single editing session, what I did in that time. And it was neat to look at that. But I realized that having just a little bit of social validation for working on the writing was kind of powerful. And like tweeting pictures of the spreadsheet was making me feel good about myself. And so I said, like, you know what? I finished the first draft of the sci-fi novel. I was going to let it sit for a bit. I kept hearing that programming was even easier now with these AI tools. And so I said, you know what? Let's just try to make an app. I'm just going to try to make an app using ChatGPT where I can track my writing sessions and people can follow and we can comment on them and stuff, like Strava for writing. And I literally got the first version of the app done in 3 weeks. And it was on my phone and I could use it. And I've logged like 120,000 words on the app so far this year. And I use it basically every day and I fucking love it. And it, I mean, dude, if nobody else ever uses the app besides me, it'll still have been worthwhile because it makes me happy. But it's on the App Store and people can download it and they can use it. And if anybody who signs up, like, I'll follow them and I'll give them kudos and comment on their stuff and like cheer them on. And it's really motivating for me. And it's really motivating to see other people using it too, because if I can help more people switch from just writing tweets to writing the kind of stuff that can really last and really spread, that's great. Like, I would feel really good about helping more people make that shift. And I think it's actually a pretty good tool for giving you a little bit of that quick win that you would normally get online, but while working on something that is longer term.
Yeah, when I first saw it, like I was, instantly like really interested because it was totally obvious for me what it was, right? Like a Strava for writing, and
Yeah.
I've always wondered like we should have like more Strava for something else. So like I felt like sleep, right? Which is kind of a weird thing, but now it's getting like cool to think about like getting
Yeah.
the perfect sleep score. And what if like you could just share that with your friends, right?
And honestly, there's an opportunity for crypto here too, because if there was if I could have like, an accomplishments, a badge, whatever system tied to my Nat Eliason.eth, which I could then connect my 8 sleep account to, and it just posts my sleep scores every day. And then I'm like getting badges on that account relative for my sleep, but my Strava is also sending things to it, and my Prolific is also sending things to it. And then I have this like Nat's accomplishment thing that's tied to my centralized identity from all these different apps. Like, that's cool. I would use that. And crypto is uniquely positioned to allow that because you have this decentralized hub for all of the work and things you're doing in other places where you can show off that work. And it's a great acquisition tool for those apps because if you come to my profile and you're like, oh, Nat uses Strava and he uses 8 Sleep, but like, what's this Prolific thing? What does he have all these writing badges for? Then you go check out Prolific and you're like, oh, this is cool. Like, I want to track my writing as well. I actually am pretty excited about something like that being made. And it does feel like a spot where crypto provides a better experience than the options that we have available to us right now.
Totally agree. What ideas do you think sound crazy or weird today, but will be mainstream in 5 to 10 years?
Having lots of kids earlier, I think we're seeing a shift, at least in the US, in the West. There's been this like, oh, you get your career figured out first and you put off having kids as long as possible. And then, in your early mid 30s, you start settling down and figuring it out. But I feel like we're starting to see a little shift where people are starting to value having larger families earlier again and starting to want that. and being willing to like put off some career stuff to do that first. I think they're one of the most interesting social trends that I've been lightly following is like Gen Z women being fascinated by trad wives on TikTok because it's this, when I think about my mom's generation, like the feminist movement and women getting into the workplace and getting all of the same rights and professional opportunities as men, it was this massive unlock. And then it ended up coming with this kind of hidden cost that women, like in some ways, got a raw deal out of it because they still have the expectations of childbirth and child rearing, but they also have the expectations of performing just as highly in the workplace. And like that's a big obligation. Like that's really hard. And for a while, it was almost taboo to say, I just want to be a mom. Like that mentality would get looked down on. And I think what we're moving to now is a lot of women saying like, no, I do just want to be a mom. I just want to like take care of my kids. I want to focus on that. I still want to have a career, but it's not going to be the focus. And like that can be totally okay. And a lot of men saying like, I want to be a like trad husband. Like I don't want my wife to have to work. I want to be able to just provide for my family. These kind of like what we might call traditionally conservative, whatever gender roles are starting to reemerge in this almost like much better way, because before that dynamic might have been bad because women were blocked from having the option to do something else. But to now have the option and to say, I actually don't want that, I want to do this other thing, is way more liberating because you're not cut off from some life. You're looking at the options and you're saying, no, I don't feel like I have to go do that thing. And so we might actually see like some kind of a resurgence or a shift back in that direction, where certainly any woman who wants to should go do the career path and should prioritize that. And there's nothing wrong with that. And if you want to prioritize family, like that's awesome too. And if you're a guy who wants to date a woman who just wants to focus on family, like there's nothing wrong with that, right? We're kind of like coming out of this post forced equality era where we're discovering like true equality, which is everybody having the freedom to do whatever they want and making the best choice for them given their desires and what is most resonant, and not being forced into something else. I mean, honestly, it kind of goes back to our egoism discussion at the beginning of the podcast, right? Like true rational self-interest is like doing the best thing for your long-term self-interest. It's not being selfish in the moment, right? True equality is everybody being able to do the thing that is the best fit for them given their interests, desires, lifestyle, whatever, not being forced into like every company has to have 50-50 men and women. Like that's not actually equality. That's like this weird forced equity thing. And it feels like we're kind of coming out of that. So I could actually see that in 5 to 10 years, it's way more normal for there to be a little somewhere closer to those traditional gender values and not this like forced idea of everybody being the same that we might have had for the last 10 or 20 years.
That's really interesting. Have you read Brian Kaplan's book, Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids, I think?
No, but I like the title. I'm bought
Yeah,
in.
he basically, I think, makes the case for basically, having kids and having more kids early.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, my wife and I had our first kid when I was 28 and she was 25. And that's ridiculously early for a Western couple living in a major metropolitan area. And it certainly introduced financial constraints and concerns and all these things. I mean, that's part of what drove me into crypto. But I mean, dude, like the fact that we're going to be 40 and our oldest is going to be in college, like that's pretty fucking cool. Right. Or not, sorry, not 40, 50. And our oldest is going to be like just about done with college is like insanely cool. Or having teenagers when we're in our late 30s, early 40s is like awesome because you just get so much more time with them and you have the time to have more. And there's something really beautiful about, I love these videos on TikTok where you see a grandparent pair and then their like 4 to 6 kids run in and then their 4 to 6 partners run in and then all of their kids run in, and it's like you lived to see 30 plus people downstream of you that you brought into the world. There's literally nothing more satisfying, I think, than having and raising kids. And it's almost looked down on as that being your sense of meaning because it's available to everyone, right? It's like, no, you have to like compete in the marketplace of ideas or in business. Like that's where you get your real satisfaction. And it just doesn't compare. And everybody, almost everybody who's done both will tell you it doesn't compare. And so if you literally have this on tap source of deep meaning and spiritual fulfillment available to you from an early age that does not require competition, that is available to everyone, like, you should go pull that lever, right? If it's an option for you, I really feel like more people should take it and would be surprised by the amount of satisfaction it brings to their life.
I think it's just going to get more interesting as we make more progress in the longevity space and on the life extension side. So that will
Totally.
introduce interesting dynamics as well.
Yeah, imagine being able to see all of your great grandchildren and run around with them, right? Like, I know that I'll be able to chase around my grandchildren because I'll be in my 60s, and I run races with people who are in their 60s and 70s, and they pass me. But like, I probably won't get to spend much time with my great grandchildren. But if Brian Johnson and whoever else pulls it off, then totally. You could imagine. I could imagine a world where in 20, 30 years, 40 years, you're seeing 100-year-olds finish marathons and Ironmans and things like that. Like, that doesn't seem impossible.
Yeah, a couple already do. Like I know one person who
Oh
actually
yeah,
ran.
that 103-year-old just finished a marathon or
Yeah,
something, right?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
there's always like one or two out of and outs, but
So
we'll see
cool.
that happening more often, probably,
For
hopefully.
sure.
Final question: you're kind of famous for not using shampoo. Um, you also said like the only product that you used for your skin was tallow soap. Not
Yeah.
sure if that's changed though, because that tweet was like a few years ago now. But why tallow soap?
Um, because I smell bad sometimes. So, I like, my hair has been fine without it. I just rinse with water and it hasn't been a problem for 8 years now. But like, I definitely get body odor. And so I wanted to find some soap that I could use that wouldn't have any ingredients I was uncomfortable with. And tallow soap is just the best. Um, and you can get it at like the farmer's market from local ranches and stuff. And they usually add like a little lavender perfume or something to it to give it a nice scent. And it's wonderful. The other thing that I use is a tallow moisturizer because it's like, I don't know, I'm in my 30s now. I should use some kind of something for my skin. And honestly, the way that I decide what like health products to use is to look at what stuff we were also using 2000 years ago. And if you read like the Iliad and the Odyssey, they talk about taking baths with olive oil. And so that was how you bathed. If you were dirty or you were getting ready for a nice dinner, you would bathe in water and olive oil. And the olive oil is what would, remove scent. It would give you like a nice shiny glow to your skin and all of that. And that was like the luxury of the time. And you can still do that, but I find that, I don't know, something about the tallow feels nicer than olive oil. I've tried olive oil too. It just feels a little too greasy. So I like the tallow soap. I like the tallow moisturizer, and I don't really feel like you need much else besides that.
Well, Nat, thanks so much for joining me. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I recommend everybody check out your book, Crypto Confidential. Um, yeah, thanks for being here. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, man. Thanks so much for having me on. It's been really cool seeing you on X and everywhere and getting to chat a little bit. And it means a lot that you enjoyed the book, since I know you're deep in the crypto space too and are pretty familiar with it. And so, hearing people like yourself who are deep in it really enjoy it means so much. Hearing people who had zero interest in crypto before reading it and enjoying it means so much. It's like, it working on something for that long is really hard. So, uh, yeah, if you read a book and you really enjoy it, find a way to tell the author because it'll just make their day.